This story is called My Wife of 9 Years Cheated with Two Men at Her Friend's Bachelorette Party. It was my wife's best friend's bachelorette party. They had planned a weekend at a cabin and my wife was really excited to go. I trusted her and didn't think anything of it. The night before she left, she came into our bedroom while I was getting ready for bed. She sat on the bed next to me and I could tell she had something on her mind. She said to me, "Thank you for letting me go. I just want to go and have fun and support my friend who is getting married in a few weeks." I said, "Of course, have a great time." She then leaned in to kiss me and we went to bed. The next morning, she left early with her friends. I didn't hear from her much over the weekend, which wasn't unusual, but we did text each other a lot. On Sunday night, she sent me a text saying that she was on her way home and would be home in a few hours. When she got home, she looked like she had a good time and she was very happy. The next day I went to work and my wife went to her friend's house to help her get ready for the wedding. Over the next few weeks, my wife was helping her friend prepare for her wedding. She would leave work and go to her friend's house for a few hours, a couple of days a week. Then one day while I was at work, I overheard some co-workers saying something about a video surfacing about what went on at this bachelorette party at this cabin. I asked what they were talking about and they said that apparently this video shows a woman getting banged by two men. At this point, I didn't know who the woman was. Over the next couple of days, I started hearing more people talk about this video and I was sort of curious. So, after work one day, my wife wasn't home yet. So, I started digging around on the computer, going to different websites to see if I could find this video people were talking about, but I couldn't find anything. My wife came home a few hours later and I asked her about the video. She had a confused look on her face. She didn't know anything about a video. So, I laughed it off and said, "I wonder what went on at that cabin." I couldn't see my wife's face. The next day I went to work and as soon as I sat down at my desk, one of my coworkers said, "Hey, have you seen that video?" I told him I hadn't been able to find it. He pulled out his phone and started showing me the video. It was the same video that people had been talking about. I was in complete shock. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It shows four half-naked men walking into the cabin with all the women in the background cheering. And then the men started going around one by one, dancing in front of all the women. I am still laughing because I assumed that's all that went on. But then the video keeps going and it shows one of the men getting really close to this woman who happened to be my wife. My whole demeanor changed. I was no longer laughing. She starts touching him. And then another man comes up behind her and he starts touching her as well. It gets worse. One man picks my wife up over his shoulder and takes her in this room. And the other man follows. My mouth hit the floor. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Eventually, both men come out of the room with my wife following behind them. She has a big smile on her face and she's completely naked. The video ends there. And I just sat there in shock. I didn't know what to do, but I gathered my composure. I then asked my coworker, "Can he send me the video?" Which he did. I wasn't going to tell my wife what I just saw. I am angry, devastated. She cheated with these two strange men without a hitch, like it was nothing and I didn't matter. So, the rest of the day at work, I was a zombie. I couldn't even think straight, but I finally got a hold of myself and made some phone calls. I called a friend of mine who's a lawyer and I asked him what I should do. He told me to take my time and think about what I want to do. But, he also said if it were him, he would go ahead and file for divorce. After the brief conversation with my friend, I called a divorce lawyer to find out what I could do based on my wife cheating and what she was entitled to. I told him we had no kids, but we own the house that we have a mortgage on and we both have jobs. He told me if I wanted to stay in the house, I could file for divorce and try to get my wife out of the house, but it would be a long battle and I may not win. So, after talking with two different lawyers, I made my decision. I was going to divorce my wife. I would file for divorce the next day. There wasn't a damn thing she could say to me why she did that to me. And I'm thinking she doesn't even know about the video. That night, I couldn't even sleep. I was so upset. I just kept thinking about that video and how my wife could do something like that to me. The next morning, I woke up early around 6 a.m. I couldn't go back to sleep. So, I got out of bed, got dressed and went to work. My wife was still asleep. I didn't even say anything to her. For those of you who are wondering, we haven't been intimate and I haven't initiated anything with my wife since that video. When I got to work, I told my boss I needed to take some time off. He could tell something was wrong, but he didn't ask any questions. I then went home while my wife was at work. I began to pack some of her clothes and other things, and I packed up a couple of suitcases and put them by the door. When I was finished, I waited until about 11:30 in the morning or so. I pulled out my phone, found the link to the video and sent it to my wife. It showed that she read it right away. When I saw that, I immediately FaceTimed her and told her I wanted a divorce. I already filed and she needs to come get her stuff. She hung up on me and then she called me back about 5 minutes later and told me she was on her way home. I told her when she gets here, I will be upstairs in my office and I don't want to see her face. When she gets home, she is crying and bawling, asking where in the hell did I get this video? I told her, I am not telling you that, you just need to leave. She then says, I am not going anywhere. This is my house too. She then says, we are married. You can't just kick me out. I told her we won't be married for long. She gets on her phone and calls her best friend, crying and telling her friend that I am trying to kick her out of the house. And I have this video of her. Her best friend then tells her she needs to come over to her house and she will call a lawyer for her. So, my wife hangs up the phone, grabs a couple of suitcases and leaves. Then her best friend calls me and asks why am I trying to kick her out of the house. I promptly send my wife's best friend the link. I assumed that my wife had shown her, but apparently not. After my wife's best friend saw the video, she told me she would be contacting a lawyer for my wife and that I needed to leave my wife alone. I told my wife's friend, this is between my wife and me, not you. And for your information, I have already filed for divorce. As the days go by, my wife is texting me, calling me, pleading and leaving voicemails. I didn't respond at all. I then get a call from my wife's lawyer. He asks, do I have a lawyer? I promptly gave him that information. He said, thank you, and hung up the phone. A few days later, I received paperwork from my wife's lawyer. It was divorce paperwork. I read through the paperwork and faxed it to my lawyer. I also emailed my lawyer, letting him know that I received the paperwork. A few days after that, I get a call from my lawyer and I ask him, what is my soon-to-be ex-wife asking for? He then proceeds to tell me she is asking for half of everything, the house and one car. He said, surprisingly, she is not asking for alimony. I told him her father is wealthy. He owns 4 hotels and a bunch of other businesses. So, I am pretty sure she will be just fine. I then told my lawyer, I want her out of the house and I want her name off of everything. He said that is going to be a little difficult, but he will see what he can do. A few weeks later, I am at work and I get a call from my lawyer and he said he had some bad news. He said, since her name is on the deed, you can't just kick her out. And since she wants half of the house, you probably will have to sell it. I told him, I don't want to sell the house. I love that house. It was our first home together. He then said, the choice is yours, but if you don't sell the house, you will have to go to court and fight for it. So, I told my attorney, I plan to fight for the house and I don't want to sell it. A few weeks later, I am served with divorce papers and a court date is set. I show up to court and so does my wife. We both have our lawyers with us. The judge asks my wife what she wants. And she says half of everything, the house and one car. The judge then looks at me and asks my lawyer, what does his client want? My attorney says he wants a divorce and he wants her out of the house and her name off of everything. The judge looks at both lawyers and then looks at us. And he asks us if there is anything we can agree on. My wife and I look at each other and we both shake our heads. No. The judge then says here in Alabama, which is a no-fault state, can be fault-based as well. And adultery is one of those faults. The judge, who is a woman, looks at my wife and says, "Young lady, you have committed adultery and I am going to grant your husband a divorce on the grounds of adultery." The judge then looks at my wife and says, "Ma'am, I am ordering you to move out of the house within 30 days, but you have a mortgage together. I can't do anything about that. You have to work that out with your mortgage lender." He then says, "Sir, she can move back into the house. If she wants, it's the marital home and she has a right to it. But if she does move back in, she has 30 days to move back out." The judge then looks at me and says, "I am ordering you to pay the mortgage until it is paid off or sold." The judge asks if there is anything else. And her lawyer says that my wife wants one of the cars. The judge looks at me and says, "Is that true?" I then tell the judge, "Yes, she can have one of the cars, but she has to pay for it herself." The judge says she can have the car. After that, the judge grants the divorce. About a week later, after the divorce, my ex-wife sends me a text saying she will not be moving back in. She just wants her part of the equity in the home and she will sign the house over to me. I text her back and I tell her the only equity we have is $30,000 and I told her I would give her half of that once I refinanced and all the other legal stuff was taken care of. I gave her half of the small equity we had in the home. A few months later, my wife's father dies and she inherits $3 million. Yeah, she didn't need anything from me. Even if her father didn't pass away, she would have still been okay. Her father would have looked after her and I will not take her back just because she inherited millions and she is tried. She has called and texted, but I have not responded and I will not. I know a lot of responses were take her back because of the money, but I didn't want to touch her. I didn't think of her the same. To this day, her best friend and my ex-wife still doesn't know who recorded the video at the cabin that weekend. Well, after all that drama, I am a free man. I was surprised at the responses I got on this site, but I guess these forums can be helpful. Thank you all for your awesome support. As a man in his 40s, I am absolutely grateful that I did not have any kids with this woman. My wife, 35, and I, 40, met at a single parents group. She had a 6-year-old daughter and I had my 9-year-old son. We hit it off instantly and pretty much agreed that very day that we wanted to try this out. It went extremely well and our kids became friends. They'd argue a little but quickly forgive and go back to playing. We got married and early on my wife's routine was to take the kids to the park while I was at work in the print shop. Since we lived in New York City, we had GPS trackers activated on our phones. It offered some peace of mind. I didn't check it every day. I mostly just took my wife's word for it when she said she was going to the park or shopping. I checked more often when this routine began, but then I learned to have faith everything would be fine. After a few years, my wife suddenly started coming home with more stuff, but the money wasn't leaving our account. It took me a while to notice this, and when I finally asked my wife about it, her answer seemed rehearsed. She said she's an excellent bargain shopper and I don't need to worry about her wasting the money I earn. I thought this was nice to hear and pretty much let it go. We went out to dinner one night with the kids and I tried to pay the bill while my wife was in the bathroom. I realized I left my card in different pants, so I looked in her wallet for the bank card to the account we shared. Instead, I found a bank card with AP's name on it. I took a picture with my phone while the waiter stared at me like I was crazy. Then AP paid for dinner. I wasn't sure how to bring this up with my wife and I wanted her to admit the truth without trying to lie. I had to catch her red-handed. I left work to find her at the Goose location on 5th Avenue. I spotted her with AP and the kids sitting at a table eating lunch. There was a third child I assumed was AP's. I was extremely devastated. Breathing was a struggle because I was seeing the woman I loved with another man and her kids behind my back. They held hands, kissed, and appeared to be married. I wondered why my son didn't tell me this was happening. I recorded them as I approached and told my wife that I just caught her kissing another man. Her expression looked like her soul left her body. She couldn't believe I was standing there recording. She asked in a daze how I found her. I told her never mind and took my son with me. As I walked away, I told her not to return to the apartment again. Her daughter started crying and called me daddy, which broke my heart. That's when my wife started crying and I realized strangers had stopped to watch what was happening. When I got home, I watched the video I recorded again and heard something I didn't hear at the moment. My wife told me AP's wife just died, as if that was a reason for her to be kissing and spending time with him. I had the guy's name off his bank card, so I looked him up. I easily found him, but no record of his deceased wife. He had an angry ex-wife that posted things relating to emotional support after discovering spousal infidelity and divorce. I decided to post the video confrontation on AP's profile. Later that night, my wife returned home completely ashamed. She begged me to forgive her because she had no idea AP was lying to her and she doesn't trust him anymore. I just laughed and told her she must be able to see she's doing the same thing to me that AP did to her. He lied, she lied, he cheated, she cheated, they deserve each other. She looked sick while she explained that AP also hid the fact that he was staying in another woman's home. She admitted he had her over there, but only when the lady was gone. He never intended to let her or her daughter move in with him, and she didn't expect to, since she never wanted to leave me. It turns out they met at the park 7 months ago and continued meeting up ever since. She thought it was harmless to start a meaningless relationship with this man if it only helped him get through a loss and benefited our marriage. She begged me not to make her leave. I told her to get her stuff and get out. I added that if she learned anything from this, she would never cheat on anyone ever again. She cried as she packed and asked me where she was supposed to go. I shrugged and suggested her parents' house. Her daughter was super upset about having to leave. She didn't want to get any of her things and she said she wanted to live with me. I think this helped my wife to really understand how badly she messed up. She broke apart our family and caused our kids to have to go through this too. Months later, our stuff is officially divided between my place and her parents. She's just taken several steps backward in life with nothing to show for the last 10 years except a daughter from a previous relationship. We tried to come together and live like a family should, but it wasn't enough for her, and she made the terrible decision to let another man love her all while pretending to be my wife and living in my apartment. As hard as this was, I know I can find a real woman that remains honest and loving toward me by choice, because it's what she wants to do. There's never a qualifying reason for a spouse to start a secret relationship with the opposite sex. She might have justified it at first by saying they were just friends, but that's how all relationships start, and if he was lying about his wife dying to make himself appear desperate for love, it's clear he expected more from the beginning. She also brought the children into it, which is always a terrible complication. Her daughter was apparently very attached to you, and she'll have a hard time forgiving her mom for ruining a loving and happy situation. It's shocking to me that she thought this would be harmless, but she probably just said that because she was caught and never expected to be. Thank goodness you found a clue and followed her that day. Thank you for sharing your story. Let's now get into our second story for today. My wife was raised by a single parent who struggled financially and would find unstable living situations at best. Her small family was resentful towards her because she was labeled as an unexpected burden. When we fell in love as young adults, she was so relieved to have found me. After just 9 months of dating, I wanted her to move in with me into my nice house just 13 minutes from the beach. This was because I saw the living conditions she endured. She made it her goal to keep our home cheery, hopeful, and organized. Things she never got to grow up with. She had a talent for knitting and started making money with an online store after just a few months of living together. She proved to me that she had ambition and hope for our future. I loved how she always had the dishes clean, clothes hung, and floor swept before I got home. She even packed my lunches in advance so I wouldn't have to spend money on fast food. Suddenly, just as quickly as she proved herself, my girlfriend started to change. She became irritated with everything I did or didn't do. Whenever I went to the bathroom, she complained that the whole house smelled and sprayed Febreze excessively. When I sneezed, burped, spoke, or breathed, she'd roll her eyes. I continued trying to be as sweet as possible, but I did start asking her to do the laundry, dishes, and pack my lunch. I needed her help and support as my girlfriend and roommate. After my request, she started doing the dishes as loudly as possible when I was home and leaving my clothes bundled up in the basket. She didn't even try to pack me lunches. The last straw for me was when we stopped having sex. I planned to confront her one day after work. I got a rude text from her and rolled my eyes before going back to work, so I missed her call. It was a butt dial and she unintentionally left a very long voicemail. I could hear her talking to someone among other weird noises, so I went home right away. I found her making out with another man in my living room. Even though she completely changed, I never suspected her of having someone else at the house. They noticed me but didn't move or say anything. I felt completely powerless and stupid for not kicking her out sooner. I just shut the door and left. She actually opened the door and asked if we could talk about it. I ignored her but figured out what was likely going through her head. She knew if I kicked her out she'd be homeless, so even though she just randomly decided to hate and cheat on me, she couldn't give up the only place she had to live. I told my good friend everything that was happening and arranged to stay with him until I could get her out of my house. She got me on the phone and actually tried to say she should be forgiven since I was the one that got distant, stopped having sex, and demanded too much from her. I told her she was crazy for thinking that way and her brainwashing wouldn't work on me. I told her I only ever treated her as best as I could, so I expected the same in return, but instead she turned into a bitter, hateful roommate. She disagreed and wished me luck getting her to leave the house because she believed it was hers now. I have no idea why she thought that, because my name was on it. It was nearly paid off since I took over the payments after my parents died. It only took about 2 weeks to get her out of there, but by then she destroyed the place. She wrote with markers on the walls, stabbed the furniture, and broke all the dishes. I was able to take her to court for the damages. All the while I was just so relieved that she showed her true colors quickly into the relationship. I was thankful she didn't try to hurt me and that I got her out of my life and house. I cheerfully fixed up the house with a grateful spirit and ended up selling it for profit. I bought a different house close to the beach, carrying on with my life while my ex left me bitter, hateful voicemails almost every day on different phone numbers. She was having a hard time moving on, but that's just what she deserves. I am so glad I didn't have children with this girl because she has a lot of growing up to do. She doesn't know what's required in a mature, stable relationship. Since all this happened, I've gotten married and bought a second rental property thanks to my wonderful wife's help. I wanted to share this terrible story so that anyone else going through something like this knows that they do not need to stay with someone that starts treating them poorly. There's no excuse for it, and living in an environment like that is terrible for anyone's well-being. I am so sorry you had to endure this betrayal from a girl that seemed so kind and genuine at first. She probably thought she had what it took to be in a stable relationship, but it was the security of a home that she craved. When she didn't know how to compromise and get along with her new partner, she just started to pull away and act with resentment. That doesn't get anyone anywhere. Thankfully, you didn't stand for this very long and went home after receiving the odd voicemail. Even though she was a terrible mistake, there was no way you would have known until you tried, and she taught you some valuable lessons. I'm sure after handling this and getting her out of your life, you become stronger and more prepared for the future. Each step you took was exactly what someone should do when they're being cheated on or mistreated. Continue treating your spouse kindly while you try to talk about what's going on, and most importantly, if it doesn't work, take action. Sign up for couples counseling or separate from an unwilling partner. I wish you the best of luck and happiness in life. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories.